Once upon a time, in a magical place called New York City, there lived 4 friends who would collaborate on a most fateful project. There was Jeffrey, bon vivant and optimist of the highest stock. There was Michael, a man born of mirth and privy to the particulars of practical persuasion. There was Edwin, mad about film and acquainted with the cesspool of renegade cinema. And finally there was Stephen, a most effusive fellow and lifestyle enthusiast. However, although Stephen would join this gaggle of frequent philosophers, he would be no more. But this, my friends, is not his story. Not far off, whilst partaking in the potables of mad mischief, there was Eric, another who would join this league, thus taking his place in that which shall henceforth be known as the CineFiles. Alas, this too is not their story. The CineFiles presents Terry Gilliam. That was close. Part 1.
Hi, I'm Edwin Samuelson. Welcome to the CineFiles, the show that allows you to eavesdrop on the conversations of fellow film fanatics. Today we're going to be discussing Terry Gilliam. It's a topic that we've all wanted to talk about. Well, you guys wanted us to talk about it for a long time, so we're going to discuss it.
All I gotta say is about goddamn time.
Terry Gilliam is the only American member of Monty Python. His specialty was animation, which, in fact, if you look at his
He worked for Mad Magazine, I believe, didn't he?
He worked for Mad Magazine. He was a graphic designer, and he wound up working for a graphic design firm in London.
Yeah. And Terry Gilliam, I would say, of all the, I'm a big Monty Python fan, of all the Monty Python members, he's the one that you would see least on camera. He was more behind the scenes.
Well, he just basically did the animation. He did the animation for Monty Python. Every now and then they would bring him in as a cast member.
Yeah, and he would, of course, he'd be like I guess you could say, like what Sam Raimi would refer to as Shemp. You know, just a person that he did in the skit, and he'd give a few lines, but he was never the primary focus of the episodes.
It was interesting how he started out his filmmaking career, because he basically was co-directing stuff with Terry Jones, who was actually on camera a little bit more than he was.
Yeah, well, that's how he got into directing, because he was, of course, the director of animation, so of course it would lead to him actually directing some feature films. And the first film that he would direct would be Monty Python and the Holy Grail, which we're just going to mention it very briefly, because I do want to do a Monty Python show in the near future, so that'll be on our Monty Python show. But he directed this film, and the people on the Monty Python members had a very difficult working relationship with him as a director. He was very, very technical and precise, and they said Terry Jones, who was the other director in Monty Python, was more an actor's director. He would interact with the guys more, and they felt that he understood their comedy better.
It depends how you define technical. When I think of a technical director, I say someone that's like a for-hire director, knows how to set up the shots, knows how to set them up to be edited properly, does an efficient job with his actors and stuff like that. I wouldn't call Terry Gilliam a technical director. I would call him a creative behind the camera.
I can concede to that. I can concede to that.
And you know, everyone knows Terry Gilliam to be a mad genius. And, you know, I'm sure
he has a style.
He has a style, and he's crazy. And I'm sure, you know, when he was first, you know, feeling his way as a filmmaker, there was a lot of kinks he had to work out.
Jabberwocky is him actually doing a medieval film of the period, and of course it stars Michael Palin who's worked with him in Monty Python, and it's a medieval fantasy. I mean, it has elements, some comedic elements, but it's played a little bit more straight, I would say.
I think Jabberwocky is intended to be a comedy, because there's a lot of really goofy elements and slapsticky elements in it.
You could see like little elements of something like The Dark Crystal and Krull that were maybe borrowed a little bit from there.
I don't see that at all. I'm gonna like disagree with you on that.
But it's very
what it sounds like you're saying. I don't know if that's what you mean, but it sounds like you're saying that somehow Jabberwocky inspired all these other films.
that I would say that's a reach.
Complete fantasy adventure, epic type films, swashbuckling, whatever. Jabberwocky is just Terry Gilliam doing his usual, doing his first kind of Terry Gilliam, kind of goofy, kind of satirical.
You could almost say a gypsy shtick, kind of.
Kind of a
his
gypsy
films
shtick,
have a very gypsy feel to them.
Kind of doing a similar thing that he did with Monty Python and Holy Grail, where it's like bring out your dead, where everything's like really muddy and dirty.
Yes.
And there's like humor in how ugly and dirty this like plague world is.
Right, right.
And you have this like naive kind of leading character that's Michael Palin. That's just kind of
not only is he
by sheer
naive,
accident,
but he's a
brought
dope.
into this situation.
He's a dope.
Brought into this situation where suddenly he's got to fight this Jabberwocky.
Yeah, he's like the accidental hero.
Well, tell
he's
everybody
the
what the Jabberwocky
antithesis.
is. Tell everyone what the Jabberwocky
Well, Jabberwocky,
It's a dragon.
It's like a dragon. It's like a dragon, but it was based. I mean, the idea came from there's a famous poem in Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass, which is like the sequel to Alice in Wonderland, where they talk about the Jabberwocky, and it's like this winged kind of like sort of dragon-like creature. And but basically it's been like terrorizing this like village and Michael Palin.
So it's kind of like a Dragon Slayer type story. The guy has to go in there and
but very
slay the dragon.
goofy.
Yeah,
but very goofy, and there's absolutely unlike a Dragon Slayer story where it's all about the dragon, right? Throughout the entire film, the whole the idea that it's about the Jabberwocky is just backward. It's like an afterthought.
Yeah.
It's really front and center is just this world that Gilliam creates, which is very sloppy and very dirty and very plague infested.
You feel like if you're in this world for 5 minutes, you're going to get some sort of disease. But I honestly think that when you read history, he wasn't that far off.
My issue with Jabberwocky, I think Terry Gilliam is a very creative director. And you see all his creativity on screen. I just find it a very hard movie to remember.
That's my problem.
Maybe that's why I'm having such trouble.
I find it a boring film.
Well, I can tell you what I think.
I like it.
It's very sluggish.
I think it's trying to be funnier than it actually is.
Yeah, maybe. You do see some flourishes here and there, but it's not one of his stronger works.
I feel when I see the film, it's him working for the first time because I know he was under a lot of pressure.
He had a very small budget, though.
Yeah,
I mean, it was
he was under a lot of pressure with Holy Grail, and this one he had not as much pressure, but he wasn't able really to. He was finding his voice as a director, and a lot of these elements that you'll see in Jabberwocky, he would revisit in his next film, Time Bandits, with the medieval setting again. I feel he was really trying to learn the medieval setting.
Did Michael Palin co-write the screenplay?
I think he did.
I think he did.
I'll double check.
There's only 2 scenes in the movie that stand out for me. There's that whole scene where I don't know. I don't even know what they're making, but it's like this big Ruby Goldberg contraption, and it's like
Rube Goldberg.
Rube Goldberg, is that how you pronounce it?
Yes.
And
Ruby was his wife.
And I didn't say Whoopi, I said Ruby.
Ruby.
But it's like a whole assembly line process, and then Michael Palin fucks something up, and then the whole thing breaks down. I remember that scene. That was amusing. And then I remember the fight with the Jabberwocky, which has a very anticlimactic kind of.
Actually, you know what? No.
Which is actually very funny.
So his next film was Time Bandits.
And Time Bandits was the first film that was a big success for him on his own. Without Monty Python, of course, and
even though it had almost all the Monty Python players within the film.
Yeah, and this one does take place, has a framing device in the modern day time, and then it's not really so much a medieval world. It's kind of like a alternate reality.
Modern day. It's modern day.
Well, it's modern day, and then he opens this world and
the
goes
time portals.
The time
it's
portals.
A fantasy.
It's a fantasy film. It's
for my money, it's probably one of the top 5 greatest children's films of all time.
And also one of the darkest children's films ever made.
It's a pretty dark film. What's surprising is when you see this film, you go, well, that PG should be a little higher than this. This is a pretty much pushing the envelope. It's a pretty grim film in certain parts. The tone.
Yes.
The David Warner stuff.
It is very grim at times in the tone, even though it mixes it up with the light humor. You can have some really dark moments 1 second, and then the next second you'll get a joke. And the joke works. And that's what's amazing. But you know something? It reminds me of something that Roald Dahl would put out. Because if you've read any of Roald Dahl's books for children, those are some pretty dark-ass books for kids. And you realize that children can handle this stuff. Now, we say this about the tone being dark and grim and so on and so forth, but it's fairly bloodless.
It reminds me a lot of, like, there's a movie called The Witches, which was a Roald Dahl story, like you're saying. It's a children's film, but
it's a lot better than The Witches.
Yes, but it has a very dark edge. All of a sudden, it starts off as this film.
Well, it's a black comedy.
It's
as
very
well
dark.
as a delightful fantasy.
It is.
It should also be mentioned that George Harrison produced this.
Yeah, that was
Right.
George
Under his
Harrison's
handmade films
who earlier produced the Monty Python's Life of Brian. This one, like I said, he called in a lot of his friends who were in Monty Python to help, I guess, add some star appeal. John Cleese plays Robin Hood, and he plays him pretty well. He plays him pretty straight, with, of course, some black humor in there, but I don't think he's too
No, he doesn't
comical.
play him straight at all.
I thought he did.
He's like
playing him as
clueless.
a parody, as like the anti-hero kind of. The whole point of Time Bandits is that this kid goes back in time to meet all of his historical heroes, all the guys that he
read about in
idolized, that he
storybooks.
read about in storybooks, and they're nothing like what he's read
nothing
about.
at all.
Robin Hood is not this heroic guy who's taken from.
He's a clueless dandy.
Yeah.
He's a clueless dandy that's basically hanging around all these like borderline cannibals and thugs, ripping. There's a guy that's ripping off people's arms. And, as you're a kid, this almost takes on like this surreal Looney Tunes quality, that there's a guy that gets into arm wrestling matches and rips off people's arms. And there's a barrel off to the side where the arms are put.
And every time like they hand something off to pour like food, they cap it off with his like henchman just hitting him in the head.
No, punching him.
Punching him, yeah.
And the
And John
henchman-
Cleese will be, is that absolutely necessary? Yeah, he says it is, sir. And he's like, oh, all right, It's hilarious.
And one great role for Sean Connery.
Well, I've read the
that story.
screenplay. And the screenplay is hilarious in itself. It's one of those screenplays where you have as much fun reading it because Terry Gilliam throws in all these like bits that you won't see in the movie, like in the stage description.
Descriptions.
And when he describes Agamemnon making his appearance, it literally says in the description, and lo and behold, it's Sean Connery because no one else can play this part, and he smiles only like Sean Connery can. And apparently, the true story is he absolutely stalked Connery to play this part, and he hunted him down on a golf course and was chasing him down while Sean Connery was trying to get away from him in a golf cart because he thought he was insane.
Well, it is a surprise when he does appear because he doesn't appear for a long time into the film.
And when you're a kid and you watch this, even if you're not a child and you see Sean Connery's appearance, and not just Connery, but the Agamemnon, the king, through the main character, the boy's eyes, you feel like a giddy little child again. Because this is one of the few people, if only person, that actually measures up to the boy's heroic standards that he had when he was reading these storybooks.
Exactly. And there's all this like...
Ian Holm as Napoleon.
Ian Holm as Napoleon's great. There's the little like bit when they're on the Titanic and they think they're on vacation and they realize they're on the Titanic. That was brilliant. And I love how it just goes way left field with the whole fantasy thing where they're fished out onto the boat. It's like Katherine Hellman and her husband, the ogre, the bad tooth, and it turns out the boat is a hat, which is awesome.
And then the world that before they have to fight the ultimate evil, the desert
and
they're
the great,
in.
I want to say James Warner.
David Warner.
David Warner as the bad guy. And
perfect casting, by the way. If you, at the time, needed somebody to play God, who would be better than Sir Ralph Richardson?
Ralph Richardson is awesome as a supreme being. I love how he's just this corporate guy. He comes out, he's in a suit and tie.
Not really. Yeah, you're right, corporate,
And
but
basically,
also
it's just like, could you clean that up, please?
Well, that's pure evil. Of course you have to clean that up.
Yeah, it's just so awesome. How could you not remember this film?
How could you not love this film?
This film is
How?
awesome. Why?
I
I
don't
like
understand.
it. I'm sorry, I just don't like it.
But what do you not like about it? What is it?
That's one reason I did. If you guys will let me get into it, I'll tell you. I don't like the lead kid. I think he's very bland.
Okay.
No, you're
It's
asking.
very strange, but
No, let him explain.
Yeah.
This is his turn
I listened to you
to
guys.
explain why you
you
didn't
see?
like a film.
Well, I didn't like the kid. I thought the kid was very bland. I didn't like him. I didn't think he was very likable. Even though I don't care if you're supposed to be likable, he just sounded very boring. Also, I did not like the cinematography. I thought it was, I don't like the way it's photographed. It's very bleached out. I think visually there's some good stuff in it, but I just don't like the way
You mean murky?
it's murky, yeah, and it kind of. I feel like the visuals that you see that are there are not captured as well as they could be, because I can see there's a lot of attention to not period detail, but production. You can tell there's a great production, like the scene with David Warner.
I think you're right on period detail.
Yeah, it's incredible. Like, when David Warner comes out, and I think it's like all the fires of hell. I remember the ground cracking. I was like, wow, this it looks great, but it just the cinematography is just over. It's desaturated. It's too bright. It doesn't work.
It's not bright enough. You mean?
Yeah, it's very bright. It's
Well,
like
he was
bleached
big
out.
on,
The color is
if
gone.
you see his earlier films, he does this with the Monty Python stuff too. You notice he likes to use filters a lot. Like
Yeah.
there's a certain like a gauzy look, which I don't mind, but
Because later on when you see his other films, they're very, very like colorful. It's like he changed his visual style quite a bit. You know, like I said, the production is there, the design, it's beautiful, but I don't think it's the camera work. It's not the camera work. It's just the cinematography doesn't capture it as well as it could. I like the Bandits. I like the Bandit. I thought the best performance in the movie was by David Rappaport, who sadly killed himself. And I like his relationship. They're kind of like the seven dwarfs. You know, they each have the good thing about it. It's not just dwarf 1, dwarf 2, dwarf 3. Each one of the characters has a personality, and I'll give a lot of credit.
And also very Three Stooges-like, too.
Yeah, that's what I like about this film is that the dwarves have more personality than I've seen in any of other film of Gilliam. I feel that all these characters are really fully realized.
So the reason why you don't like the film is because of cinematography.
The cinematography,
like
the kid is a little bland, and also I feel there's some parts of it are a little sluggish. Like it's great, then it slows down a little bit, then it gets back fast again. I didn't feel it was consistent. The pacing was a little off for me.
Okay.
But I do think there's a lot of great stuff in it. And like I said, the appearance of Sean Connery is a highlight. That's a great surprise when
So
he
you
makes
think
his
it's an
appearance.
okay film then?
I think it's a good film. I don't think I feel it fails to realize its full potential. But there
Okay,
is some
so you
very
did
good-
like the film.
I'm going to say almost thumbs up, not quite. It's a close, but not no. You know, it's close. I'll give it a cigar. But anyway, the next film he would do would be he would do a short segment for Meaning of Life, which we'll get into later. But anyway, Time Bandits was a pretty decent-sized hit, and because of its success, it was brought to the attention of the head of Universal, who liked the film quite a bit, and he saw Terry Gilliam's script for Brazil and immediately said greenlighted the film, and they produced the film, and he thought it was going to be a fantasy kind of a la Time Bandits, you know, something that everyone could see. Well, the film, when he saw it, he was very, very pissed off because it was completely the opposite of what he intended. And in fact, he tried to take control of the film and re-edit it, which
He did.
He did do it, and
Love saves the day.
yeah, Love Saves the Day, which that cut was ironically released to TVs, you know, TV showings
To
and stuff.
explain, that cut was known as Love Saves the Day.
Love
It's
Saves
just-
All.
right.
Yeah, because of the ending. That's just the it was reshot without.
And
really.
if you watch this film, if you watch the original Brazil, and then you watch the Love Saves the Day cut, and Criterion actually put out a 3-disc.
There's 3 cuts of film. I should get into that. There's the original. There's Terry Gilliam's original cut, which was about 35 minutes. Then there was another cut, which is the one that got released into America, which is 10 minutes shorter. And then, of course, there's the Love Conquers All cut, which is the studio-approved cut, which was released to TV.
Love Conquers All.
Love Conquers All. That's a TV cut.
Exactly.
Anyway,
Love saves the day. Let's go buy some action figures.
The story of how the whole story of just the release history of Brazil could make a movie out of it, in which they did. It's on the Criterion disc. But the film, the Universal threatened. They said we're not going to release the film. So Gilliam was smart enough to have a small screening for selected critics who claimed it.
Well, you forgot. He also put a full-page ad in
Yeah,
Variety
to release my film.
saying, "Please release my film."
Yeah, and he screened it for these critics, and one of the critics said it's the best film of the year. So of course, Universal was in a really uncomfortable position. So they secretly put out a cut that was closer to Gilliam's version, but it wasn't completely his version. When you see this film, when you see the Terry Gilliam's film, you go, "Wow, this is a great movie," but wow, who gave him the money to make this type of film? Because it's not a movie that's for mainstream audiences. It's a really big budget art film.
Yeah, but you know what,
With
though?
sci-fi
I'm going to
elements.
say that what I always found odd about the problems the studio had with that film is that during that period of the 80s was a big time for independent, like especially the big thing was foreign independent films, like the British. You had, Chariots of Fire, all that stuff, coming out. Then you had
My Beautiful Laundrette.
My Beautiful Laundrette, and you had the down-to-earth take on Tarzan, and all sorts of stuff coming out. So I was always confused as to why they had a problem with Brazil, of all films. You know, because Brazil felt squarely in that category of visionary filmmaking that was going on in that period of the 80s, especially...
Yeah, the only trouble is during also in that period in the 80s, there was a lot of schlocky crap coming out, too. Some of the worst comedies in history were made in the mid-80s.
I think the issue with Brazil was it cost so much money to make that film that they started to freak out.
But, to be fair to that, you see the money on the screen.
Well, you do. And also Gilliam, you know, is famous for not staying within budget.
Yeah,
this was not the bonfire of the vanities where you're scratching your head going, where was the money?
Exactly. But it's Brazil is a masterpiece. Brazil is...
It is a masterpiece.
Yeah, I always talk about, you know, we'll mention a film, I'll say this film is on my top 10 favorite films of all time. Well, Brazil is on...
This is like top 10, top 15 for me. It's just phenomenal.
The thing about this film is that it could not have been made any cheaper. And it would have to be a big budget film because of all these elements.
It's a brilliant movie in so many ways. I said before that it's like an anti-1984. 1984 was a totalitarian regime, but was efficient in its fascism. Whereas this isn't so much a fascist regime, it's just a bureaucratic regime, which is entirely different. And everything breaks down, and nothing's working, and people get arrested due to like clerical errors.
Yeah, snafus.
And the humor comes out of all that bureaucracy.
Buttle.
And it's so brilliant.
And the underground terrorists that are the freedom fighters within this world are plumbers.
What I love about the film too is I love the dark humor, which I think is brilliant. I mean, I think it's his best use of comedy ever in a movie.
That's a great cast besides Jonathan Pryce.
Well, my favorite scene in the movie is the scene that always makes me laugh. Is the scene with the desk. There's a desk in the room, and
that's a great.
That's a perfect. It reminds me so much of like something you'd see out of like an old Buster Keaton or Charlie Chaplin film.
But there's a lot of that film. Even like the scene when like he's trying to like get. Is it Pam Griest? Kim Griest. Kim Griest. He's trying to get her attention. She's trying to drive away because she thinks he's crazy. And he's like on the window, and he's just like, you know, it would be like an action scene in another movie, but it's a great, great deal of physical comedy. Jonathan Pryce is awesome.
Yeah, quite a find.
Kim Griest was much better in Chud. Just to let everybody know, she was in Chud, and I thought she was better than that.
And when you were talking about cameo earlier with Sean Connery, that wasn't a cameo. This one was a cameo with Robert De Niro as one of the head plumber.
But he gets like really high billing in the film. You know, it's not.
Yeah,
really
but he's not in there. That's a cameo.
He's not in there that much. And you have like a little, you know, they have like one Bob Hoskins makes an appearance. He plays one of the two guys. You know, the
reason the film works so well for me is not. I remember I was talking about how the visual style. This one. His imagination, you see it really well captured by the cinematographer. The color, it's vivid. It's a futuristic world, like you said. It's beautiful to look at, but you can see it was one day beautiful.
But this would make a great double bill with Blade Runner because there's so much attention to the props and to the detail and how that like helps create this world. Like everything from like I even remember the scene where you have one of those big like sort of vacuum cleaners, motorized vacuum cleaners on the court steps, you know.
Don't you feel that if
the computer or like the weird kind of like magnifying glasses they have to look at the computer monitor?
Don't you feel though that if this would have got the studio support immediately, that it could have been a contender for Best Picture?
Maybe, yes, but not a box office success. But I could see it winning Best Picture.
I would say
better than Out of Africa.
I would say yeah. I would say absolutely. Oh yeah, as much was that what
that was the winner that year. It won. Yeah, it won. That was the big picture that year.
Well,
that was actually Universal.
Well, that was also during a time once again in the '80s where you could almost predict who was going to win the Oscar every year. It was like a boring drama. It seemed like one boring drama after another was winning the Oscar year after year after year in the '80s.
And who was great in this is Michael Palin. Because Michael Palin starts off playing a Michael Palin-like character, very charming, very polite, you know, but he's also really scary.
Yeah.
When you
especially those baby masks.
Right.
Those baby masks are like from your nightmares.
You know who else? We forgot to really talk about. We didn't talk about her too much in Time Bandits, but she's terrific in this. Is Catherine Hellman.
You know the story about how Terry Gilliam came up with the idea to do Brazil. Right. He had I think he had a dream or some sort of like creative vision where he heard the song Brazil, which is a famous, you know, bossa nova type song, whatever. And he had this vision of this lady sunbathing on what wasn't a beach, but just like some sort of post-apocalyptic wasteland. And that became his idea. He just like developed the idea from there.
You can see Brazil's influence in a lot of films. In fact, one I remember I was watching, but I could not help but think Brazil was a movie called Dark City. very similar in style, very similar. And as Blade Runner was the future template for a lot of sci-fi films, I think Brazil was just as well.
I would say also there's some stuff in the Coen Brothers.
Yes, yeah,
It's greatly influenced by Brazil as well.
Absolutely.
Especially like Hudsucker
Hudsucker Proxy. I was gonna say that.
Well, anyway, let's get into his next film. It was a while before Terry Gilliam. In fact, I think Brazil did a lot of damage to his career, but somehow he's able to get financing for his next film, which was The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, which was this time set up at Columbia. And before it even came out, it got a lot of bad buzz because the budget was out of control. At the time, I believe it was stretching to be one of the highest budgeted films ever because of all the delays. And this is when Terry Gilliam really got the reputation of being this crazy director a la Michael Cimino, Heaven's Gate. The film is another fantasy film, kind of. It's similar.
Based on famous German legends.
Yeah, it was a propaganda piece.
Baron Munchausen was a popular sort of character.
It's a fictional German character.
Almost like a Zelig type character existing within almost like a fairy tale setting, but also mix in like mix in with like the War of 1812 and
more of a Don Quixote kind of character.
And he was used he was used in German propaganda. He was used in German.
Well, yes and no. Baron Munchausen.
Not so much. I don't know. I'm sorry. You're right on that.
It was a famous series of stories, and he was sort of like a Don Quixote kind of character. He was like a teller of tall tales, and he would always put himself in these stories, and it was up to the reader to decide whether or not he was telling the truth or not. And it was a popular series. I forgot who was the initial writer of the Baron Munchausen stories, but it was turned into a film in the 1930s, early 40s.
I think it was
like
even earlier than
1930s. Kurt Jürgens, who played the Bond villain in The Spy Who Loved Me, played Baron Munchausen. And it was a propaganda piece for the Nazis. But the actual Baron Munchausen stories go way back.
Kind of like Pippi Longstocking, I guess.
No, Pippi Longstocking is a modern day character.
Yeah, but
Baron Munchausen goes all the way back to.
But I'm saying national pride.
It's kind of like our Paul Bunyan. It's kind of like our, Davy Crockett kind of thing.
Well, once again, littered with these great cameos. Oliver Reed as Hephaestus, Uma Thurman as
Which
Venus.
was a part that was offered to Sean Connery, and he said he didn't see the role in it. No. He was offered the Robin Williams part.
Okay.
And he said, I don't see the role. I don't see a part in this. I don't see a part in this. But then again, Connery was famous for turning down Gandalf because he didn't get Lord of the Rings.
So that's why he accepted that Leave Extraordinary Gentleman.
So Robin Williams took the part and turned it into his own thing.
And that's what him and.
He was the underworld god. He was Oliver Reed we're talking about.
Yeah. Hephaestus.
And Uma Thurman, I think, made her first appearance.
Yeah, she was Venus.
Not her first. No. It's one of her earlier appearances. She was.
That wasn't her first.
No, she was in a movie called Kiss Daddy Goodnight.
Okay.
And also Johnny Be Good. That terrible Anthony Michael.
So, but what do we think of Baron Munchausen?
I like it, but it's a flawed movie in the sense that it starts out great, and it kind of loses its way Now, to be fair to people who are big fans of this film, I only saw it one time. And I'd like to revisit it again. I haven't seen it since it first came out.
It's a fascinating failure. I think it's worth seeing. It's so much imagination is in this film, where there are so many good things, but it feels like that's all about the set pieces, and it does feel like an unfinished film.
Well, the problem is, and it's obvious, is that Terry Gilliam is not wrangled in and controlled. He's going to go crazy.
He also ran out of money, and he couldn't film everything he wanted to film as well. And so a lot of the stuff that he wanted to put in, it feels like the story. There's like barely any story. It's just.
So who was the actor that played Munchausen again?
That's John Neville.
John Neville, right?
He's very good.
He's very good, but I don't know if he's the guy that you want to carry this film. Now, obviously, it's The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, but maybe, just maybe, you could have had a child or a smaller figure, and you see the world through the child's eyes in what Baron Munchausen is presenting, whereas you're
well, you had the character played by the very young Sarah Polley.
That's true.
Sarah Polley a few years ago came out and said that she was afraid of Terry Gilliam for her life because she had some very difficult experiences on the set. There's a scene where she's in the water. She said Terry Gilliam was a very, very tough person to work with. And in fact, Terry Gilliam even acknowledged it and apologized to her.
Eric Idle is wonderful as the speedster.
Yeah, he's
When he one of the best scenes in the movie.
he's chasing the bullet.
Chasing the bullet. That's
Yeah.
great. And he goes to
Oh,
grab
no,
it.
it's a cannonball. Oh no, it's a bullet. You're
It's
right.
a bullet.
It's a bullet. You're right, because he has
Well,
to grab it.
I really, this is the perfect example of what I don't like about Terry Gilliam, is that he has so many ideas, but he couldn't get his handle on it.
It's not really the sum of its parts, but if you take each individual sequence, it's really stunning to look at, and it's a lot of fun to watch.
Let's put it this way. His spectacular failures are usually better than most every other person's attempt at making a film, because at least you're getting... I would rather watch Baron Munchausen on a constant roll than something like Beverly Hills Cop.
Yeah.
I just don't like the film. But I will say, I kind of agree with you on that, but we'll get into a film that I think is one later on that I cannot stand. We'll talk about that later, though.
Uh-oh.
Hey, Glow?
SpaghettiOs. We broke
The
a
clip broke off.
Can't we have anything nice around here? Just break things randomly.
This is not Jerry
Like a
Springer.
bull in a china shop.